Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2022 GMC Sierra 2500, we're going to be showing you how to install the Curt fifth wheel installation kit with the embed rails. But before we do that, why don't we check it out and make sure that this is something that's going to work for you. So when it comes to putting a hitch in the bed of your pickup truck, you know, there's a ton of different options out there now, and it's really just going to depend on what you're trying to do. One of the benefits to the fifth wheel rails like these here is it really opens up your opportunity. So as you know already, you can put your fifth wheel head in here. It'll bolt up or lock into the rails, and you can pull your fifth wheel trailer. Or also, there's a lot of different adapters and plates and a lot of different things that'll work with these that'll allow you to have a gooseneck ball back here as well. So like I said, it opens up your opportunities, and having these back here it's going to allow you to pull whatever type of trailer you're trying to tow down the road. So whenever it comes to picking out what hitch you want back here, you know, fifth wheel rails like this, they're pretty straightforward, not really much to them. You know, you just have your brackets on the side that bolt to your frame and your rails. And generally speaking, they're all about the same. With that said, what I look for in these kits is the quality. How well do they fit? And how do they look and everything like that. Fitment probably being the most important thing to me. And these actually fit really well, believe it or not. A lot of times they'll end up trying to fight you when you're trying to get them installed, and things just don't want to line up right and everything else. And these went together pretty smooth, a lot smoother than I anticipated, to tell you the truth. And when it comes to that fitment, I primarily see two manufacturers that I like having the best. One of them being B&W and one of them being Curt. And I've done B&Ws before, I've done multiple Curts, and they're about on par with each other. Sometimes the B&Ws have a slight advantage, and that wasn't the case at all with this one. So, you know, those are my two recommendations that I would always suggest whenever you're picking out a fifth wheel rail kit to put in the bed of your truck. So the rails are going to have all your common attachment points, all the spots for your fifth wheel head and everything else to kind of drop into place. Generally speaking, most fifth wheel heads are going to work with this, at least some that are up to date. You know, I can't speak for every single one, but like I said, these are pretty generic, so you should be in pretty good shape there. Whether you have really wide attachment points or one kind of in the middle. And then you even have the ones that are real close together. And actually our customer today is using these for this adapter piece here. So this doesn't come with it, but I kind of mentioned this earlier, how you can use a gooseneck. And so this is going to drop into the rails and set like that. So pretty cool, you know. Like I said, it opens up your opportunity. Everything fits in snug and lets you get the job done. So this install kit and rails are going to work for those trucks that have both the short bed and the long bed. So regardless of which one you have, it's going to bolt in. And it's designed for trucks that do not have that OEM prep package. So if your bed inside has some little cutouts that you can pop out, there's usually 4 or 5 of them. That means you're not going to need to use this style. They make a lot of really cool hitches now that utilize that prep package and just drop in. So if that's your case, definitely check that out. You can find a ton of them right here at eTrailer. Something that I do always like to recommend, obviously if you're putting an embed hitch back here, you're going to be pulling that fifth wheel or that gooseneck, and those are going to have 7-way wiring plugs. That way the lights and everything else work. So I always like to suggest using embed wiring. So in our case, our truck has a factory knockout here, and we can utilize that and make it really easy. We're actually putting a kit in today, which is this one, the Curt, so that'll fit right in there. Comes with the wiring, it just plugs in pretty much, so really straightforward. That way, it just makes it a lot easier to plug your wiring in. You know, it's all right here, plugs right in. You're not going to have to drape that wiring over your tailgate down to the 7-way on the back of your bumper. So other than that, I mean, at the end of the day, pretty nice kit. You know, it looks good, it went together smooth, and everything fits well. So what more can you really ask for? As far as the installation goes, it really wasn't too bad. I've done some that are way harder and some that are a little bit easier. This is definitely on the easier side. So it shouldn't give you too many issues. I'd say probably set aside a good half a day, you know, half a Saturday, maybe a little bit more time depending on how fast you're working and things like that. But, you know, really nothing too crazy. Not special tools. There is one that I use to make tightening the bolts a little bit easier. So I'll show you that, and hopefully that'll help speed things up if you run into some snags. But, you know, shouldn't really fight you too much. But speaking of the installation, why don't you go ahead and put this on together now. To begin our installation, you're going to want to get up in the bed of your truck, and we need to take a couple of measurements. That way we can find the placement for our rear rail. So make sure to follow the instructions, and when you're doing this, pay attention to if you have a short bed or a long bed, because the measurements can vary. So pay attention to that. Whenever you are measuring as well, make sure you go from the end of the bed itself and not your tailgate. So what you're going to do is take that measurement, make a couple of lines. That way, you know, you can find where that rail is going to be. And then what you're going to want to do is center it. The way that you can center it is just measure from the end of the rail to the side of your bed. So generally you can go from, let's say your wheel well there. But regardless, you want to make sure that you're taking the same measurement on each side. So you'll take those, split the difference, make sure they're the same on each side, and that'll find that placement for our rear rail. Now what we can do is come to our rear wheel wells. If your truck has these liners, we're going to need to get them out of the way, whether it be pulling them completely out or just kind of pushing them down so we can work. We'll kind of find out when we get there, but ours has them, so it's something we need to do. And it looks like we're going to have 2 fasteners here, 3 in the middle, and 2 more over here, and maybe a couple more too. But all of these that we're going to take out, we're going to use a T15 Torx bit. So just start with these. So once all of those are out, up top here, looks like we're gonna have 3 more. So one of them is a 10mm nut. And then this one here in the center, this is kind of just a keeper. You can just do this by hand, just unscrew it. Then we'll have one more 10 on this side. Now what we should be able to do is kind of grab this liner, start to kind of work it out. So we can kind of see what's going on here underneath our frame. So I think we should be able to work like this. If it ends up being hard to see or kind of just a pain, we can always come back and just pull this completely out. But I think we should be in pretty good shape for now. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing over on the other side. So I went ahead and kind of looked a few steps ahead and just seeing what we're going to have to do. Honestly, I think it might be more trouble just to work around this as opposed to just taking it off. So that's what we're going to do. In front of the tire, in front and behind the tire, you're going to have 3 more T15s. So I got the ones up front out already. Go ahead and pull these out if I can get to them. And with all those out, now we should be able to just kind of lift this up and move it out of the way. And yeah, this is going to make it much better, much easier. So I'm glad we did this. It'll be a little bit easier here in the future. All right, so now what we can do back up in the bed, make sure the rail didn't move on you or anything like that. we're going to mark what holes that we're going to be drilling out. So from the outside, working your way in, we're going to go 3 sets of holes. So 1, 2, 3. So these ones here. A few ways you can do this. You can use a center punch. I tried with this bed liner. You can hardly see what's going on there. So you can use a paint marker. What I'm going to do is just take a small drill bit, put it in the center, just kind of tear off some of that bed liner. That'll be good enough for what we're doing. Just marking the spot here. If we continue our way along, in the center here, we're going to have another hole, and you want to use the one closest to the back of the truck. Continuing along, same deal on this side, 3 holes in. So I'll put our marks here, and everything should be centered up and more or less ready to go. So since we have everything marked, I moved the rail out of the way just to make it easier. And now I'm going to come back with my drill bit, pilot bit, and drill through completely. Not a bad idea to check underneath the truck before you do this. That way, you know, you don't hit something of importance. But with that said, we'll go ahead and get these drilled out. Now back to our wheel wells. We're just going to check everything before we start getting carried away, drilling out the holes to the correct size. What I did is you'll get 2 fish wires, 2 of the metal pull wires in your kit. I just took the ends of them and dropped them through the pilot holes that we drilled. So they're coming out here, and this will just give us an idea that everything's lined up. So take your side plate. These are side specific, so make sure you grab the right one. And we're just going to roughly hold it up and make sure everything lines up. So this is going to sit. That's something like that. And I know it's probably going to be tricky to see, but this is just a quick way to verify that everything lines up. So I'm looking in there, and it looks like our fish wires are lining up with their holes. So I think we'll be in pretty good shape, and now we can get everything drilled out to the proper size. So now that we verified everything lines up, we're going to come back and enlarge these holes to 9/16 in size. I'm using a step bit. So we'll go ahead and get all these done. So with all the holes drilled, went ahead and just kind of cleaned everything up. And since we have some bare metal here, I'm just going to use a paint stick to put a coating over it, help prevent rust. You can also use spray paint, but I've noticed with that, unless you're super careful, it kind of isn't the most appealing to the eye. Usually you can see it kind of bleeding out from under the 5th wheel rail, so that's why I do it this way. And, you know, just help get a layer over that exposed metal. So I'll do that for all of our holes. Now here back to our frame rail, we can get our hardware in place. So you're going to take the large bolt and the spacer block with the matching size square hole in it. Take your fish wire, you're going to thread that onto the bolt. And then if we look at this hole right here, it's kind of that oval shape. Just going to take the head of the bolt. We'll probably have to do this one at a time. Push the bolt in, and push that spacer block in as well. Then pull it back out like this here. Now we can take this U-bolt, and towards the back of the truck, in this general area, we're just going to take this, slide it around our frame. And this should be pretty close. When we hold our side plate up, we might have to move this back or forth or whatever, but at least it's in place and kind of ready for us to put it through our side plate. With the hardware in, we can grab our side-specific side plate and see if I can show you what's going on here. So this hole, that's where that big carriage bolt's going to go through. And these 2 holes, that's where the U-bolt is going to go through. So take your fish wire, push that through. We'll see if we can do this without knocking the U-bolt off. Pull that. And try to get our bolt through here. And we'll remove the fish wire. Take the flange nut. Get that going a couple threads. And we'll see if we can't manage to get this one here. So line that up. Get our U-bolt through there. And then these, you're also going to take some flange nuts and just get them started hand tight for now. Once this side's done, we're going to repeat this same process over on the other side of our truck. I do want to say, when you're bolting these up, make sure that the inside of your frame rail doesn't have any wires or lines or anything like that you could pinch, that these U-bolts could pinch. So just something to think about when you're doing this, and double check so you don't damage anything. So back up in our bed now, what I've done, since we already have our holes drilled, is I cleaned up that yellow marker, so we're not going to be able to see it once our rails are in. But we're going to take a rail, line it on up with the holes, and then we're going to take these carriage bolts and simply just drop these down through our holes. When you're doing this, you want to make sure that they're falling through the side plates too. So, for example, if you look down in there and the side plate's off, you can take your punch or screwdriver and just kind of, pry it a little bit to get it to line up. But it should be really close. Ours was. So go ahead and just drop all these in there and make sure the rail's sitting flat and how we want it to be. So what I've done now is just temporarily removed our spare tire, and that's just going to give us a lot more working room underneath here and just make it a lot easier to get our hardware started. But with that said, let's go ahead and move over to our driver's side and get the rest of the hardware going. So here's the side plates, and you can see where our bolts from our in-bed rail are coming down. Since there will be a gap here, you want to take these spacer blocks and put those in. That way it doesn't get crushed whenever we're doing this here. So I'll do that on each bolt. And then you're going to take this spacer block and a flange nut. Put that over it, and we're going to get these started hand tight. I'll get this one going, and same deal for this one here. Go ahead and repeat this same process over on the other side. And we'll have one more in the middle that we need to do as well. So here's what the middle one looks like. It obviously doesn't come through a rail or anything. So all you're going to do, where the bolt comes down, put up one of those U-shaped spacer blocks. And again, another one of those flat ones, like we used on the other side. And the flange nut. Over on the passenger side, you're going to have this heat shield. And what I was able to do is just kind of bend it down some to give us the room that we need. We may have to remove this, kind of just depends once we get our front rail on, but for the time being, this is going to give us enough space, and we'll kind of cross that bridge for the front one whenever we get there. So now with all the hardware in place and hand tight on our side plates and our back rail, we can take the front rail and we're just going to get it roughly into position. And then at this point, you're going to take your fifth wheel or whatever it is that you plan on using back here. In our case, we have this conversion. It's just a plate that gives us a gooseneck ball. So that's what we're going to be using. You're going to put that into the back rail and then line it up with the front rail. If I can manage to get it to go in here. So set that down, and we're going to use this plate to determine, or use our hitch to determine where this rail needs to go. So we'll make sure it's pushed up nice and tight. And since it can still move side to side, what I'm going to do is grab our tape measure, just like we did the back one. Make sure this is centered and where it needs to be. I'll go ahead and mark that out, and then we can kind of continue to move forward. So I went ahead, got our rail centered the same way we did the other one, just measured the distance on each side, and want them to be the same. And essentially we're going to be doing pretty much the same thing that we did for the back one. So we're going to be using 1, 2, 3 in. I'll just take my bit and make a mark there. And then for the one in the middle, you're going to want to use the side that's closest to the front of our truck. So this one here, it's really the only difference compared to the back one, for this part at least. And then again over here, you're going to go 3 in. Now that we have our marks made, it's just going to be a little easier to work. I'll go ahead and lift everything out of place. That way we can get our pilot holes completely drilled and finally enlarge them to the correct size. So with everything out of the way, I went around and drilled our pilot holes, and now we'll come back with the step bit and enlarge them to the correct size here. So I did the same thing. Once we have our holes enlarged, cleaned everything up, wiped the paint off. I put paint over the bare metal, and now we'll grab our rail, line that on up, take our carriage bolts, and drop them through all of our attachment points. So what I think I'm going to do is take our hitch and put it just back into place. And I feel like this will kind of just prevent anything from shifting or anything like that while we work on getting the rest of our hardware in and getting everything tightened down. So now underneath the truck, we can get our hardware going. And kind of tight back here, a little hard to see, so bear with us here. But the ones we're going to work on first will be the 3 bolts closest to the front of the truck. So you got your center one, and then the one on each side. So since these aren't going through the actual side plates or anything, just our truck bed, what you're going to do for all those is take this thick spacer and then that spacer. All right, and you're going to stack them on top of each other and put them over the bolt like that. And then you can take a flange nut and get it started hand tight. So I'm using that same hardware combo for the other 2 bolts closest to the front of our truck. So the front bolt here on the driver's side, pretty tricky to get to from underneath because it's right above our fuel tank. But from the side, you can actually see it pretty decent. Still tight though to get in here and both your hands and work. So I'm gonna try this out. I think it might work. I just taped our spacer blocks together with some packing tape. Then I used some vice grips here to kind of hold it. And I think, hopefully, I can kind of do one of these deals. So you hold that in place and then take our nut and get it started. It's definitely gonna be tight, might take you a couple tries, but I think this might be the easiest way to get this started here. And it actually worked out pretty well. We'll just go ahead and get our vice grips off. So now for the bolts that actually go through our side plates, just like the other ones, you're going to take these U-shaped blocks and put them on top of the side plate. So in between the corrugation of the bed and the side plate, so it's going to fill that void. So we're just going to do this from the side as well. I think this might be the best bet for these. So I get that lined up. And then we're going to have that square spacer block that's going to slide up over the bolt and our flange nut. So let's see if we can do this. Like I said, it's just kind of tight and I'm going to mess with a bunch of different hardware here. So and one thing you can do too, if it's really fighting you, say if that bolt keeps wanting to push up when you try to get everything on, if you have to, you can always go up top and either have a friend kind of push down on the bolt or even just put some tape on it, kind of tape it to the rail. And that can make it easier sometimes if it keeps fighting you. And so to hold this block, I might just try to use a magnet here. It's just hard to kind of hold everything together and do this. So a magnet will buy me a little bit more space, hopefully. So once you have all of your hardware and placing it in tight, we can just snug everything down. And what you want to do is kind of work, what I like to do is work my way from the middle out. So I'll tighten these two bolts, and then more or less what you want to make sure of is that you're going to tighten down the base rails or the rails first. So you tighten these down and then the ones on the side. And then once those are snug, then you come to your frame plates or your side plates and snug them down. So go ahead, grab a 3/4 inch or 19 millimeter socket and wrench, and start getting everything tightened. So like I said, once all the bolts holding the rails on are tightened up, we'll come back and hit our side plates here. When you tighten up the U-bolt, you want to try to run it down evenly. That way it kind of just draws everything together how it should. So what I like to do is just kind of hit it a little bit on each side and try to get the same amount of threads exposed, or at least relatively close. So once everything's tight, we need to make sure and come back and with a torque wrench and actually torque everything down to the amount specified in the instructions. I'm going to use that same tightening sequence that we did to snug everything up. If you don't have a torque wrench, you can grab one here at eTrailer, or a lot of times go to your local auto parts store. They'll have one there available to rent. And pay attention to the torque specs when you're doing this, because there's 3 different specs, some for these carriage bolts, some for the big bolts, and then some for the U-bolts. So just make sure you got the appropriate setting for the appropriate bolt. So I am well aware that some of the bolts underneath the bed, or some of the nuts rather, are just in that kind of a tight spot. You know, there's really no other way around it. If your torque wrench has a really thick head or something like that and you're having a real hard time getting the socket on it, what you could do is use a tool like this. So I call it a dog bone. But what it's going to do is connect to your torque wrench and then have a low profile design and kind of get everything pulled away from outside. And this is what I use to torque those down. So definitely would recommend, if you don't have one, you can probably pick some up at your auto parts store or something like that. 3/4 inches in size is what I used, and it really did make things much easier. So once everything is torqued, I went ahead and just reinstalled our wheel well liners the opposite way that we removed them. And that's really all there is to it. Everything's pretty much wrapped up now. I'm going to wait to put my spare tire back up because I have some in-bed wiring that I'm going to run. And so it's probably going to be easier with the tire out of the way to do that underneath the truck. So if that's what you're going to be doing next, putting the wiring connector in your truck bed, probably wait to put the spare up. If you're not or already have that done, simply just raise that spare tire back into position. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Curt in-bed fifth wheel rails with the custom installation kit on our 2022 GMC Sierra 2500.